I'm absolutely delighted that Denise and Elizabeth have asked me to present this afternoon to you. My name's Philippa Doyle. I'm a solicitor and partner at Hempson Solicitors, who are a national firm who specialise in supporting the health and social care and charity sector. And just a little bit about me in particular, because there may be a number of people on the call who've not heard me speak before. I've got 25 years experience now of working with providers, mainly out of hospitals, so primary care, community care, lots of work with social care providers. And the majority of my work is in this court of protection arena, with some information governance work as well. And for my sins, for the last sort of 10 or more years, I've been specialising in advice to the sector in relation to the CQC. So I am going to do you a roundup today of sort of where we are, kind of everything that happened last year with CQC in terms of the changes that were notified, what did and didn't happen, and guide you through kind of key points that you need to know in relation to the single assessment framework. So very much kind of where we are and where next. This time last year, the new single assessment framework had properly launched. It went live everywhere at the beginning of February 2024. And I was full of optimism this time last year. And I have to say, I still am, around the single assessment framework and the potential that it has in terms of how it can work so much better for yourselves as providers, and the way that CQC assess you. That optimism has to be a bit dampened at the moment, because we are kind of left wondering what on earth has happened over the last year, because the rollout and the operation of the single assessment framework really hasn't quite worked in the way that everybody envisaged. The IT didn't work. It wasn't quite as bad as the Horizon scandal, but it's not far off. They certainly didn't have enough staff, or they didn't have the right staff in the right places. And the reports that we were seeing just weren't properly reflecting the service that was being delivered on the ground. So there's a lot of work there for CQC to do to get things right. There's obviously been a phenomenal amount of adverse publicity, and I'm really pleased that the now not so new government and the not so new leaders at CQC are actually grappling with all the deficiencies that have been identified and addressing them, because it's very often what I tell providers to do as well. There are certain things that you can have a fight over and that you can pick your battles, but there's also plenty of occasions where I will turn around to a provider and say, look, you could spend however many thousands of pounds with me on challenging this report, but actually the time might be right for you to invest that money in the service, in improving the issues that have been identified rather than fighting over them. So as I say, I'm really pleased that CQC are taking the same approach, that they're accepting that there are problems there and that they need to work to fix them. What I can tell you is that the single assessment framework isn't going anywhere anytime soon. There are a number of the much bigger national providers who have really lobbied to go back to the old system and the old way of inspecting. That is absolutely not going to happen. So my advice to anybody and everybody that has to engage with CQC is that's what you need to do. You need to engage with the new system. You need to engage with the processes. My focus is very much, rather on being there to pick up the pieces if and when something goes wrong, is to work with you to ensure that you can present your service to CQC in the best possible light. The report from your service that goes on the internet, that goes on CQC's website, is basically marketing for you. I'm not going to say it's free marketing, because there's an awful lot of work that goes into the front end of it, in terms of what you need to do in presenting your service. But if we look at the shift in the last 10 years, families and individuals are scrutinising CQC reports in far more detail than they used to, and they are treating everything that's in those reports as the absolute truth and an absolute representation of your service. And we all know that sometimes that isn't quite the case. So my focus is very much on helping you to pick apart each of the new quality statements, and ensuring that what you present to CQC is absolutely what CQC are asking for, so that you can try and get the best possible score through the assessment process. So we've had a number of not so recent announcements now. Just before Christmas, we had various announcements. We had Dr. Penny Dash and Professor Sir Mike Richards, who have both reported in the autumn and winter. And the reports that they put forward very much echoed the concerns that have been expressed by providers, big and small, up and down the country, around the change of approach that we've seen from CQC, not just with the single assessment framework, but also pre and post COVID, where the focus became very, very risk averse, very black and white. And there was just no room for any kind of softness or any kind of grey areas in between around interpretation or understanding of a particular situation. There've obviously been huge concerns in relation to the rollout of the single assessment framework, both with the IT and with the staff teams not gelling. And the recommendations that came out of both reports have been accepted wholeheartedly by CQC. And so they've now set out 4 commitments in terms of what they're going to do going forwards. So they've said they're going to align the organisation, so CQC itself, around sector expertise by appointing at least 3 chief inspectors. So with the single assessment framework, they've tried to homogenise everything and merge everything together. And that's really not worked. Although the questions are the same, the way each sector operates are very, very different. So they've recognised the importance to go back to having a lead inspector on hospitals, primary care and adult social care. We've had some interim appointments to those positions, but we haven't had any firm appointments yet, and we're still lacking that clarity on absolutely who's going to be the leader in each section. They've said that they're going to modify the single assessment framework, and I'll pick up on this with you in a little bit more detail shortly. They're going to try and make it simpler and ensure it's relevant to each sector, but what that's actually going to look like, we just don't have any detail on yet. And they've said they're going to ensure the right systems and tools are in place to support the regulatory activity. To my mind, that means they're going to fix the IT and they're going to have the right people in the right place. And they've also said they're going to improve the experience for providers who are registering with a new service. And again, to my mind, that's that they're going to fix the IT and make sure that the portal and the registration process works. So those are some very clear commitments that they've put forward. You'll be aware from very recent announcements, and anybody that happened to make it to any of the very recent CQC provider forum meetings, that they've now announced what they're calling the CQC way. We don't actually know what this means yet, but what I can say is that I personally have got a lot of confidence in Sir Julian Hartley, the new chief executive, with his CQC way. I've got personal experience of when he was chief executive at Leeds Teaching Hospitals, when he combined 2 kind of warring hospital trusts into one really successful trust with his Leeds way. He's obviously trying to mirror that kind of approach with the CQC way, but we've got no detail yet as to what that means. Certainly the Leeds way was having 2 different hospitals who'd got very different ways of working, that he wanted them to have a streamlined approach. We've not quite got that situation with the CQC, so I'm not sure, as I say, what the CQC way means, other than one provider said to me, well, that sounds like it's CQC's way or the highway. But, you know, as ever, devil will be in the detail. That crossroads that CQC have been at for a number of years is still there. They're still not entirely certain what their purpose is, whether they're there to set the fundamental standards through the regulation of your services, whether they're there to support providers to achieve high quality care. My view, and certainly what's set out in the original statute, is actually their function is to do both. You know, they're there to regulate you, they're there to enforce whether the fundamental standards of care are being complied with, but they're also there to help and support you. So if they find out that A, B, and C is wrong with your service, they're not there to just beat you around the head and say, sort it out. They're there as well to tell you that you need to do X, Y, and Z to sort A, B, and C out. So again, it'll be interesting to see whether that detail comes out and whether we start to get more of that guidance role that we used to have in the old days, more with Andrea Sutcliffe. There is a lot of focus on collaborative working, both with providers, but also with people who use the services and with their families. CQC are doing as many kind of engagement events as they possibly can to make sure that any changes that they make to the process are made with providers and with those that use the services in mind, so that they're actually delivering something that everybody wants and that will actually work. They've set out some immediate actions that they've already taken in terms of unblocking stuck assessments. I had a client receive their draft report last week when they were assessed back in September. So that's taken nearly 6 months for that report to come through. And I know there's lots of stories of over 500 reports being stuck in the IT system somewhere. So it's good to see that those are finally starting to be released through, although the quality of them is questionable. They've said that they're going to progress the enabling of new assessments. There was a massive downturn in numbers in terms of the number of assessments that were carried out last year compared to previous years. So they've really got to get themselves organised in terms of increasing the numbers and get those assessments through the system. They're working through a backlog of concerns and notifications, again, that got stuck in the IT system, and working through the backlog of new registration applications, again, that got stuck in the IT system. But it's good to hear that they're progressing that and they're sorting it. And then they've got what they call foundational improvements, which to my mind is kind of stepping stones that they're setting in place in terms of their direction of travel and where they're going. They've already said we've got the CQC way, whatever that may be. They're looking at operations and regulatory leadership integration is their terminology. My interpretation of that is around having new leaders for each of the service lines and getting those service lines set up and properly in place. They've got the assessment approach, which will be amends to the single assessment framework. They've got systems they need to look at, which obviously is the IT. And then they've got what they're terming organisational data ratings in the register. And again, that's going to be sorting out the IT, sorting out the reports, sorting out the practical side of things. I know that Sussex has been identified as a pilot area, we believe, for going back to a new version of the relationship holder, which everybody was used to pre-COVID. And I'm fairly certain that most people would support that, because it was great when you had somebody that you could pick the phone up to and that you could build a relationship up with, rather than just talking to that empty contact centre in Newcastle when you never know who you're going to talk to and whether they really understand your service or not. So there's lots of foundations, lots of stepping stones for positive things in relation to change that CQC are doing. But the main thing that we all want to know about is the single assessment framework itself and what modifications CQC might be making to it. So they've said that they want to be able to carry out and report on inspections more quickly. And in some cases, we have seen some really quick inspections going through, but they've been very quick and dirty inspections. They've only been looking at 5 quality statements. They've done very brief reports, and they tend to be those services where there really is no cause for concern at all. So whilst it's great that they're getting through and producing mini reports on those services, it's not really dealing with the nub of the issue, which are those services that have been languishing, normally with a requires improvement, for very, very many years, that would really benefit from a proper detailed inspection to showcase themselves and show that they're now good or possibly even outstanding. CQC have been very clear that the 5 key questions are going to remain. So we've been very used to safe, effective, caring, responsive and well-led, and those are not going away. We'll still have those 5 domains that we're used to working with. The 34 quality statements that sit underneath those 5 key questions are going to be amended to ensure clarity and avoid duplication. You'll have noticed yourselves that if you've started looking at any of the quality statements in detail, there is quite a lot of duplication. Some of that is necessary because there is going to be some duplication around issues that relate to the safe domain compared to issues that relate to the well-led domain. So there will need to be some duplication, but there's certainly some work that can and should be done in relation to those quality statements so that a provider doesn't find themselves having to submit the same piece of evidence 5 or 6 times to answer various different questions. One of the immediate changes that they've already implemented is that they're going to stop scoring individual evidence categories. And they did that in relation to services that were inspected from the 2nd of December onwards, so just before Christmas. Again, those of you that are familiar with the new process will know that they've got different types of evidence that they look at, which they put into different evidence categories. So one evidence category might be feedback from staff and leaders. Another evidence category might be processes, so that might be your documentation and your policies and procedures. And they were at one point giving a score for how good the feedback from staff and leaders was, and giving a separate score for how good your policies and procedures were, and then combining those scores to reach an overall score in relation to the quality statements. They've cut out that lower level scoring, so they're not scoring the individual evidence categories, the different types of evidence. They're just giving a score for the quality statement itself. But if, like the client I'm working with, who was inspected back in September and has only just received their report, they have still got that individual scoring in, because obviously the inspection was carried out before the beginning of December. But we should see that phased out, because it does add an unnecessary level of complexity into the scoring regime. So do we know anything? Do we know any detail about how the quality statements are going to be amended and which ones? The short answer to that is no. You might have been one of the providers who fed into a survey and submissions that the Care Providers Alliance did back in October. They were asked to lead on that, and they had over 1,200 submissions in the end, together with a number of workshops. Feedback from the Care Providers Alliance, and in terms of the information that they presented to the CQC, came out in early February. I've put a link there on the slide that you'll be able to click into when the slides come through after this session. It's an interesting read in terms of what the common themes were, but there were basically 3 recommendations that focus on changes required in the functioning of how the single assessment framework actually works. They focused a lot on the poor experiences that providers has had that CQC needed to work on, and they were looking at what needed to change in terms of the culture and the communication from CQC. And out of that, I understand the recreation and the piloting of the relationship manager has already been implemented. We're already also expecting a second report from Penny Dash as well, that will be known as Dash 2, and that's going to focus on the broader landscape of health and care arm's length bodies, which is basically a review of all of the regulators. Are they fit for purpose? Do we need so many different regulators? How are they going to work going forwards? So that it'll be interesting to see what her thoughts are around some of the other regulators that operate in the health and care sector, as well as her thoughts on CQC and how those fit together. One of the other conversations that also has been going on for quite some time is, what does good look like? And so CQC prepared a draft publication in November, which I don't know whether that will turn into a final publication or not, whether it's disappeared into a black hole and been abandoned, or how that might work. But it's called Characteristics of Key Question Ratings and Quality Statement Scores. It sounds a little bit like the old Key Lines of Inquiry and Ratings Characteristic handbook that you might remember, that used to set out the 303 different Key Lines of Inquiry questions that they used to ask you under the old regime. It was quite an interesting read. It's quite a useful document if you can find a copy of it still on the internet. It does give you kind of some thoughts as to what CQC are thinking about when they score you, and gives you some useful descriptions so that you can look at whether your service matches how they're describing a service. But my own personal view is that compliance with the regulations, going back to basics with the fundamental standards, the regulations that underpin what you do, and giving CQC what they're asking for under the quality statements, is what's going to showcase your service and what's going to secure the rating that your service deserves. So if you're compliant with all the regulations, you're going to get a good rating. If you're not compliant with the regulations, if there are some gaps, then there's a possibility that you're going to find yourself in enforcement action, or you might find yourself with a requires improvement rating across one or all of the domains. So a little bit of a plug from me. I do deliver fundamental standards back to basics training on the regulations that really helps you ensure within your service that you're totally compliant, because that's really going to be the cornerstone to you getting that good rating. The other thing that's come back from in terms of feedback from CQC themselves is that the only challenges that they seem to be getting are from the bigger providers. They're not hearing from the small and medium-sized organisations that I imagine that the vast majority of people on this call represent. And the feedback that I get from providers is that there's a lot of resource that's involved in challenging a CQC report, both in terms of time and potential money. But there's also an underlying fear of, who am I as a small provider to stand up and challenge CQC? And particularly a service that might be one that's maybe got 2 or 3 services within the group. The view is that, well, if I challenge CQC in relation to one of the services, that might have a knock-on negative effect on the other services in my group. And I really don't want to, poke the dragon and have them attack my other services. My view and CQC's view is that the factual accuracy process is there to ensure that the report that goes out and that is there on the internet forever is a fair and accurate description of your service. CQC would have you believe that it's about you verifying the small details. So if the report says that there were 10 members of staff on duty, but actually there were 12 members of staff on duty, you'd produce the matrix that shows that, actually there were 12 there, so that anomaly can be addressed. But actually, this is your one and only opportunity to challenge anything and everything that's written in this draft report. As I say, it has become a marketing tool. And so it's really important from your point of view that the report that's out there on the internet is a fair and balanced reflection of your service. There are some inspectors that have developed a habit of writing things in a very negative way rather than in a neutral way. So sometimes when I'm doing a factual accuracy challenge, I can be encouraging them to change the wording and the way a sentence is drafted just to give it a more balanced approach, rather than the wording leaving the reader with a very negative feeling about a service rather than a balanced or a positive feeling. I'm a really firm proponent of providers using what's available to you. Even if you get a good rating, if there's something in your report that doesn't quite ring true or that you don't quite like, then use the factual accuracy process to challenge. It's actually much easier to challenge the new style reports than it was under the old ones, because when you get your draft report through now, there's a paragraph about each individual quality statement. And when you do a factual accuracy challenge, you do it on a quality statement by quality statement basis. So you can look at what wording you want CQC to use or what point you want to raise on a quality statement by quality statement basis, and can do it in kind of little chunks, little buckets as you're working your way through it. You've not got a massive document that you're trying to work out, well, it's line 5 of paragraph 3 on page 12. It's much easier to do. Little bit of a plug for me again. I am speaking at the Care England conference in 3 weeks' time, and they've asked me to speak specifically on how providers can do the factual accuracy challenge process themselves if they don't want to engage the services of myself or other lawyers. And so I'll be doing a session guiding you through how to do that and how to do it for yourselves if you want to. That will also be replicated as a webinar that I think goes out on the 1st of April. So if you can't make your way up to Westminster for the conference in person, do have a look on the Care England website, because there will be details of the webinar that's completely free that you can sign up to. But my view, as I say, is that it can have a really long-term impact on your reputation and your revenue if you've got a report on the internet that just isn't a fair reflection of your service. So I really would encourage everybody to use that process. CQC want you to use the process. They want the reports that are published to be right. Otherwise, people will lose not only confidence in your services, but they'll also lose confidence in the regulator, if it's possible for people's confidence to drop any lower in them at the moment. So that's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour as to kind of what's happened in the last year and where are we now. I just thought it would also then be really useful for me to do a reminder for you in terms of if CQC turn up tomorrow, what you need to be prepared for and what you need to do. So the single assessment framework is still live, it's still operational. CQC could still turn up to your service tomorrow. They're focusing on it being an assessment rather than inspection, and that's because it's a two-stage process. The idea is that there'll be the paper-based analysis of information that will be uploaded to one of their analysts so that they can go through all the documentation. And the inspector that comes into the service will be doing observations whilst they are across the threshold in your premises. What we're seeing in practice at the moment is that because the IT isn't working yet, it still feels like an old style inspection, that it's the inspector that's coming in with a long list of documents and information that they want to receive from you. So it still feels a little bit like the old process, even though it's under the new quality statement approach. They're still sending out and asking for PIRs to be completed, but I think it's just an automated computer system that sends them out. And certainly I've heard feedback from some providers and from some inspectors who said, well, we don't even look at them. So whilst it's a useful exercise for you to fill one out in detail, because it helps you think about and inform what's going on within your service, do be mindful that CQC may or may not take an awful lot of notice in what's written in it. The priority, though, is the quality statements. And CQC are supposed to tell you which quality statements they are assessing you against. If they don't, when you come into their service, then stop them and make them tell you which quality statements they're looking at. You need to know so that you can give them the right evidence to answer the questions that they're asking. If you've got a service, an inspector who is not telling you, then CQC have said on their own website that you as a provider should push the inspector and make sure that you get that detail. Do be aware as well that the number of quality statements that they assess you against is going to be based on soft intelligence. So that will come from conversations with the local authority and the ICB commissioners, might also be informed by any complaints that CQC have had about your service that have come into them direct. So that will inform which quality statements they're going to start off looking at. Could be anywhere between about 5 and 11 is normally their starting point. But if they come into your service and they find particular concerns in particular areas, you can see the number of quality statements increasing, and they can also decide that they're going to come back into your service because they want to look at more. So I had one care home in the north of England who was inspected quite early on in the process last year, who CQC came back in August and expanded the number of quality statements that they wanted to look at before they finalised the report and shared the draft report of an inspection that had started in sort of February, March time this time last year, because there were areas that they were concerned about that they wanted to look at in more detail and wanted to expand the number of quality statements. So they ended up in the end, I think, having about 22 different quality statements that were reviewed. So do be aware of that. You possibly all know about the new scoring that's now going to be implemented as well, that each quality statement, each question gets a score of 1 to 4 based on the information that has been provided in response. So a score of 1 is inadequate, 2 requires improvement, 3 is good, and 4 is outstanding. Those percentages across the different quality statements that have been reviewed are then converted into percentages to give you the rating for each domain. So in the safe domain, there are 8 quality statements. So your maximum score there would be 32. And that can then be converted into the percentage score. This is where as well, I think it works well, and it also helps on a factual accuracy challenge as well, because if you can see that the percentage score that you've received in one domain is perhaps 59 or 60%, so you're just a couple of percentage points adrift of getting that good rating, you can go through your different quality statements and think, oh, okay, I scored a 2 in that quality statement. I think there's enough work that we can do in relation to that quality statement to get that bumped up to a 3 with submissions that we can make and additional evidence that we could put forward. And if you can get some of those 2s converted into 3s, then that will bump your percentage score up into a good overall. So that's another reason why it's absolutely worth going through the factual accuracy challenge process, because you might only need to get 2 or 3 of your scores adjusted to get a whole change in your rating. What we're finding with a lot of the draft reports at the moment as well is that they're very AI driven. They are created by a computer system. So if they look very bland, or if they're not interpreting the information that you've provided properly, then that's another reason why you should be challenging, so that you can make sure that the inspector who came out and saw your service is absolutely involved in the drafting of the report. I had one domiciliary care provider who had done an awful lot of work to turn their service round that had been rated requires improvement just before COVID. And when the inspector came into the service, she said, this is absolutely amazing. You've got eyes across everything. I'm going to be recommending you to be outstanding, which the provider was absolutely bowled over with. But when the draft report came through, they were good across the board, which ordinarily they would have been happy with, apart from the fact that the inspector had said, I think you should be outstanding. And when they read the report, it was very bland. It didn't have any colour in it. It didn't have any detail in it that really showcased how different their service was. And so they went through the factual accuracy challenge process, and they really fine-tuned the evidence and the information that they were providing in response to each of the individual quality statements. And the outcome was that they got outstanding across the board. So it was a fabulous example and a fabulous success story of showing that, if you put the effort in, if you go through the process, if you're really particular about what information you're sharing in response to each question, then you really can get those maximum scores. As I mentioned already, people are concerned to know what good looks like so that they can make sure that the scoring that they're getting is valid scoring. We don't have that detail from CQC. It's been suggested with the CQC handbook that's been promised. It might be the document I mentioned earlier. But as I say, my view is that as long as you're meeting the requirements of the regulations, that you know what the fundamental standards of care are and you're not letting your care fall below that level, then that's what good looks like, and that's what's going to score you those percentages in the good level. Just a note of caution that there are some rating limiters. So the example that I always use is in the safe domain, is there's a whole question that focuses on infection prevention and control. So if for some reason you've got some members of staff who decide that they're not going to wear the right PPE, they've not got gloves and aprons on when they're doing a particular task, the cleaning has all gone to pot on that particular day, and the inspector's wandering around saying, well, this service is dirty and you've not done this and you've not done that. And so you get scored a 1 on IPC, because things are really bad. But the rest of the service is absolutely brilliant, and you might be, scoring 3s and 4s, you're looking at getting good or maybe even outstanding. Because you've got that one area where things are really bad, CQC will limit the rating, and the computer system will limit the rating. So even if you are looking at getting a good because of your percentages, because you've got that score with a 1, it's going to limit your rating down to requires improvement. And the same if you're looking at outstanding and you've got a 1 or 2 on that one particular area, then that rating is going to be limited to good. So if you're wanting to get those higher ratings, which I'm sure everybody aspires to, you've got to make sure that it's across the board. You can't just kind of concentrate all your efforts in one area and forget about a few other bits and pieces. It's got to be across the board. And as I say, we hear stories. I have providers tell me about their experiences all the time. So we had the service that, the inspector said it should be outstanding, but the report came back as good. But equally, I've seen it the other way around, where services have been served with, concerns in relation to breaches of the regulations, but they're still getting goods because of other really positive points going on. So there's all sorts of, inconsistencies going on that we need to be mindful and aware of. And it might just mean, as I say, that you've only got 1 or 2 quality statements that you need to challenge during the factual accuracy process. It might not make a difference at all. Sometimes I do a lot of work with providers and we just don't get anywhere at all with CQC. Other times, it makes a massive difference. So I really would encourage everybody to have a look. It's worth trying. As I mentioned, and as I think everybody is aware, you've got your 6 different evidence categories, only 5 of which apply in the social care setting. So you've got people's experience, feedback from staff and leaders, feedback from partners, your observation, which is when the inspector comes into the service, and your processes, which is your documentation, your policies, your procedures, your daily notes, everything that might be on your care system in relation to the people that you support. So CQC do look at those individual types of evidence, and different types of evidence apply to different quality statements. So not all of those 5 different evidence categories will be considered in relation to each individual quality statement. Sometimes it will only be 2, sometimes it will only be 3. But do be very mindful when you're reading your report, because we do often see that observational comments might fall into a feedback category, or a review of evidence under processes starts getting included in observational feedback, and it can look a little bit confusing. My view is, if it doesn't look right, if it doesn't sound right, then challenge it, because this is your one and only opportunity to do so. I think everybody's got used to the concept of the quality statements. As I say, they follow those 5 domains that we're used to, so safe, effective, caring, responsive, and well-led. And we've got 34 of the quality statements, so there's a different number of them under those 5 different domains. Safe, for example, has got 8 quality statements, so it's got kind of the lion's share of them. And you kind of think, to start with, oh, brilliant, we've only got 34 quality statements when we used to have 303 key lines of inquiry. But actually, when you break down each quality statement, they have got multiple elements to them. I know when I've done kind of separate sessions with services, and we've looked at quality statement 1, for example, which is all about learning culture, it's got lots of different elements to it. And there's a lot that's involved in pulling information together to make sure you're giving CQC everything that they need in order to demonstrate compliance. So the approach that I take, and the training and the support that I provide to providers, is very much around working through each quality statement, breaking it down into constituent parts. What does it actually mean? What does it actually say? And then looking at putting it back together and looking what evidence you've got within the service that could answer that question. It's very much around going back to school and taking a school exam approach. When the teacher used to say, don't just write everything you know about the subject, make sure you actually answer the question. The same is true for CQC under the new single assessment framework. That was certainly what happened with the domiciliary care provider whose report came back as good. They basically gave CQC every single piece of evidence they had about their service, about all the work that they'd carried out to drive improvements. And the computer system was just overwhelmed, and CQC were overwhelmed. They didn't know what to do with all of the detail, and they couldn't necessarily put the detail into the right pigeonhole. But it's not their job to do that either. Just like it wasn't the teacher's job when they asked you a question about, why did Anne Boleyn lose her head? They didn't want to know everything that you knew about Anne Boleyn or any of Henry VIII's other wives. They wanted to specifically know why Anne Boleyn lost her head. So, they might only have picked, 1 point out of all of the information that you gave. And it's the same with CQC. Quality statement 1, treat it like one bucket. What's the information that we've got that we're putting in this bucket that will respond to quality statement 1? Because the CQC's computer system, when it then moves on to quality statement 2, it has no memory and no idea of what was in bucket 1. They then want you to provide a whole load of information in relation to quality statement 2. What information are you providing to us that goes in this bucket that the computer system and the assessor can then review? So it does mean that at the moment, you are potentially going to have to provide the same piece of evidence multiple times because you might need it to drop into different buckets to answer different quality statements. Do not assume that because you've told CQC about something, that they will use that information and that they will put it in the right bucket at the right time. Had a conversation with a provider yesterday that was saying, but we had a complaint and we responded to the complaint and CQC closed it all down. So why are they now referring to it in our report? The complaints department are a completely separate division to the assessors and the inspectors. Unless you physically give them the information, treat the complaints department as somebody completely different, and that CQC assessors don't know about your complaint and about the fact that that complaint was closed down. Force feed them the information, show them what needs to go in each bucket, give them that information to put it in the bucket because they won't do it for you. It does mean that you have to do a lot of preparation, but you've got all of this evidence within the service. You're all delivering brilliant care. It's just a case of thinking about what does CQC actually want to see in response to this question and starting to have things prepared. So I spent a whole day with a service a couple of weeks ago working through the different quality statements, and they'd done the exercise and had set up a shared area on their computer system going, well, these are examples of all the things that we could share with CQC to show that we're compliant with this quality statement. And they were absolutely spot on and they'd done a brilliant job. They just needed to find the time to go through and look at each of the quality statements to put all of that information together. And this is where preparation is absolutely key. So last year I did a number of webinars for Care England, all of which are available on Care England's website. They've got their own YouTube channel. So you can go in and rewatch those webinars and listen to what I had to say. But what I did was I broke down some of the key quality statements to show you what they mean, what CQC are looking for, what regulations are important so that you can then put them all back together again and start that work throughout your service. I also developed a toolkit in consultation with Care England that they supported us on that does that piece of work in relation to all of the quality statements. So you can purchase that toolkit and you can work through that in your own service. And what I recommend is that you use the toolkit as a sort of continuous development plan, so an audit process that you can use in your service throughout the calendar year. Pick a few quality statements each month to focus on, set yourself some short timescales and set up some specific action plans of things that you're going to achieve in relation to those quality statements each month. And then you can start to have a rolling annual program that, whatever you're doing in March this year, you can come back to it again in March 2026 and kind of pick up on what work did you do, what extra work can you do, and that in itself demonstrates a learning culture to CQC and ticks some of those boxes from quality statement 1. It's very much about being proactive, not reactive with the new single assessment framework. And preparation and sorting your evidence out is absolutely key. As I say, this is your opportunity to really showcase your service, to shine to CQC, because this is all going to go into a report that is going to be a marketing tool for your service. So the preparation work that you put in is almost like preparation work that you might do if you had a marketing service come to work with you to say, right, how are we going to showcase your service? But it's you putting in the work, showcasing to CQC how good you are. So as I suggested, create some folders on your network or in hard copy if you prefer, one for each quality statement. Look at what evidence you've already got within your service that would answer that quality statement. Think about what extra evidence you might need, whether you're capturing all of the really good work within the service in documentary format. Maybe there could be some work that you could do that would improve on how you capture that information, and then look at how you present it all, because it's all about evidence. This is all about thinking about, right, I'm in a school exam. How do I demonstrate to the person that's marking this exam paper that I know what I'm talking about and that I can answer this question? And that's what the single assessment framework is really all about. But where on earth do you start when you've got these 34 horrible quality statements? You could start at the beginning with quality statement 1, and certainly that's what some services have done. But that first quality statement, I did a whole webinar on it just on its own. It's a big, complex, multiple quality statement that's got a lot in it. So it can be quite scary and it can be quite daunting. You could go to the other end. You could start at quality statement 34 and look at well-led, which is all about environmental sustainability, but it's very open-ended and nobody really knows what it means and nobody's been assessed against it yet. So it's probably not great to start at the end either. So the view I've taken and the recommendation that I've made to services is start with what you know. And there are 4 quality statements across 3 different domains that look at staffing and how you support your staff. So you've got quality statement 6 about safe and effective staffing, 19 about workforce wellbeing and enablement, 29 about freedom to speak up, and 30 about workforce equality, diversity and inclusion. And everybody's used to dealing with staff and you're used to working with staff and policies. So how about if we're making a start that we make staff your focus in March? Let's get everybody involved in reviewing those 4 quality statements. Get all of your staff team involved from, right from the bottom all the way up to the top. What evidence have we got in service that we've already got that we could collate together that would answer these 4 quality statements? Is there anything that we're doing that we could do differently or that we could do better? Do we know what our neighbours or our competitors are doing? Have we got new members of staff that have moved from a different service that could share ideas on what a different service are doing? Collect everything together under those 4 different quality statements so that you're ready if CQC turn up, that you can show what you're doing. And then make that a target for what you're going to do every March. And so every March, everybody knows, right, March is staffing month. And this is what we're going to do, and we're going to have real focus moving forwards. And once you've done those 4 quality statements and you've kind of given yourself the confidence that, yeah, I can do this actually. This isn't that hard. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm talking about. We've got this evidence within our service. Then you can start tackling some of the other more complicated quality statements and divide them up across the course of the year. So you've maybe got 2, 3 or 4 each month that you're focusing on and that you're getting a number of people involved in to collate the evidence and make sure that you know what you're talking about. Safe and well-led have absolutely got to be your focus. Sort those quality statements out as a priority over the others, because those are the priority areas that CQC focus on. The largest number of breaches are always in relation to Regulation 12, Safe Care and Treatment, and Regulation 17, Good Governance, which is the well-led element of your report. Get those 2 areas of your report right, and everything else should follow. Caring should absolutely look after itself, because most of that is done on observations, and all of your staff and yourselves are caring people, otherwise you wouldn't be in this industry. So that should absolutely shine through. But as I say, do focus on safe and well-led, because those are the ones where the greatest number of breaches arise. Draw yourselves up some action plans. Let's not have those really long mammoth lists that just get longer and longer, that nothing gets crossed off. Get some really short, really focused action plans. Top 10 issues in one particular area or around one particular quality statement. If possible, get them all signed off and finished within a month. Generates better results, it generates better change, and it also looks better to CQC as well, that it shows that you're using the toolkit, you're auditing yourself, you're looking at where you need to improve, and you're making those improvements and getting those quick wins and moving things forwards. I've talked very quickly. I've given you a lot of information. Apologies around that. You will get the slides and can go back and look at the recording again. But I cannot emphasize enough how much preparation is key. The services that I've seen who have been rated outstanding are the ones that have prepared every piece of evidence. Some of the outstanding services under the old system used to sit there and think about what's our response to each one of those 303 key lines of inquiry. All we're doing is translating that into a new process and into a new arena, and making sure you're sharing the right piece of evidence to answer the right question. As I've said, it's absolutely like that school exam. don't write everything you know about Anne Boleyn, because the examiner doesn't want to know about it. They specifically want to know why she lost her head. So don't tell CQC everything about your service. Specifically tell them what they want to know about the learning culture within your organisation. And do think about the fact that you might have to share that same piece of evidence or make the same point multiple times to answer multiple quality statements in a slightly different way. Whatever the changes are that CQC make to the system and to the process, all of this work will not be in vain, because the core elements of the single assessment framework will be there. None of this is going to change so dramatically that this work is going to go to waste. It's all going to be really, really good evidence of striving for continual development and continual improvement within your service. And whilst there might be some tweaks around the edges, or those 34 quality statements might go down to 30, I can't see that they're going to be huge changes overnight in the way this process operates. Those services that are ready, those services that are engaged, that have empowered staff, that have given staff the confidence, really help them to understand what's going on, how the new process works, are the ones that are going to fare really well under this process. Being well prepared, having your evidence ready, is going to give you the confidence that when CQC do turn up, it's still going to be a terrifying experience. I know what it's like. I get audited by the Law Society, and I spent the whole of last Easter bank holiday weekend going through every single one of my files when I found out I was being audited after Easter. So I entirely sympathise, and I know what it's like. But being prepared, knowing what evidence you've got within your service, knowing what the questions mean and how you respond to each one of those quality statements is going to stand you in really excellent stead for when CQCs come calling, because they will turn up at some point. So just by way of support from me or any other agencies that are out there, please do use that factual accuracy challenge process. CQC are expecting it, and they do want to see it from you. So don't feel concerned about using it just because you're a smaller provider. Do call me. We offer half an hour's worth of free advice to providers, so that's available, or do drop me an email. If you do want to engage our services, we offer preferential rates to members of the care associations, but equally we're there to support you to try and do it yourself if you prefer to go down that route. I offer lots of training, so I can do some back to basics for you on the fundamental standards. Can also look at some bespoke single assessment framework training with you as well. Was talking to Elizabeth and Denise this morning about potentially getting some groups of registered managers together, if there would be some interest in that, to do the fundamental standards training. It's a half-day session. If anybody wants a copy of my toolkit or wants some bespoke individual single assessment framework training, then you've got my contact details on the end of the slides as well. So please do get in touch, and we can have a conversation about what support I can offer into your service to help you through this process. And then just finally, as I say, I'm at the Care England conference in 3 weeks' time. We've got some dates for webinars that all be on a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. If you want to sign up to any of those, that will all be available through Care England. But otherwise, you've got my contact details, and that's me. So we've just got 5 minutes left at the end, and I see Elizabeth just flashed up again as well. So if there are any questions from anybody that you wanted to raise now, or you wanted to put into the chat, then please do pop your hand up and let me know. But equally, if anybody would rather follow up with me privately, very happy to have a call, or if you want to drop me an email, happy to have those discussions too.
I do have a question around when you was talking around the percentages.
Yep.
Alongside the ratings, and that example where somebody's at the top end, maybe at just a percentage point, missed a percentage point of being good. Do CQC publish those percentage points as right, so people can see where they are on the spectrum?
Yes.
They do. Good.
Yeah. So when you get your draft report, you see what you've been scored out of 4 for each quality statement, and then what your percentage is for the overall domain. So for example, under safe, you might end up with a percentage of 59%. So you're just short of being good. But you would then see your individual scores for the different quality statements. And so you'd see where you'd scored a 2, and you'd think, well, actually, if I can just get 2 of these 2s bumped up to a 3, that's going to impact on my percentage, and it's going to push my percentage over into up into the good domain. So it's absolutely worth doing just for that alone, because you can see how far adrift you are.
And you presumably, as a provider, you do get that opportunity to submit after the inspection, submit additional evidence and information.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, you do.
Oh, that's good. And is the priority for inspections, is it still, the backlog, those providers with long outstanding ratings, is that still the priority to get round?
I absolutely don't know. There was a point during COVID, which quite rightly, they were taking a very risk-based approach. And so they were looking at those services that had been rated inadequate or services where complaints had come through. And there was then obviously a lot of pushback a couple of winters ago about a lot of services that were languishing as requires improvement. And that meant that commissioners weren't sending placements through to them. So they had a commitment a couple of years ago where they were going to try and get around as many requires improvement services as possible to hopefully get them uplifted. But we've just had, unless anybody has any insider knowledge, I've not heard any detail at all as to what their priority is, as to how they're trying to work through the backlog now, as to where on the list people are.
Well, that's maybe something we could push Denise as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be really useful to understand that priority and how they're going to move it forwards. And I suspect it may vary from area to area depending on how many inspectors they've got on the ground. And
you've got a question from Julian. Hi, Julian.
Yeah, there's a discussion around about doing digital assessments, actually not visiting, and just doing it all by evidence and feedback from the CQC, which I think would be one way of getting through the backlog. Where are we at with that? And I understood that you could actually request a review. That we've tried requesting a review twice and drawn a blank.
And I think that's because they've got such a massive backlog. Your emails have probably just disappeared into a black hole that they don't see as a priority at the moment. I would keep asking the question. I would keep plugging away, and particularly if, as we hope, you do end up having being a pilot for relationship managers in Sussex. That would certainly be something that you can really push with whoever that ends up being, to get things moving.
What about the digital question? Is that really going to happen or not?
So the digital element is supposed to be everything other than observations. So the way it's supposed to work, if the IT works, is that you upload all of your information and all of your evidence in advance. And when the inspector comes out to look at the service, they are only looking at the observational element, and that will be very much bolstered by all of the information that's already been uploaded in advance digitally. Because the IT isn't working, the ability to upload information just isn't there. And so they're still operating, from what I've heard from providers on the ground, under the old process where the inspector comes in and, sometimes will go and lock themselves in your office and bark orders at people about what documents they want to see and what evidence they're looking for. So it still feels like an old style inspection, but under the new framework.
Thank you.
Marie.
I think you've got another, you've got a couple of, Marie.
Thank you. My question was around the pilot that's potentially for Sussex area. Do we know sort of how long that pilot's for and when we're likely to kind of see the outcome of that? What did it work and when it would be sort of rolled out wider, or if it's a phased approach? Do we have any more information on that?
And not at the minute, Marie. It was it was shared at an East Sussex Registered Managers Forum by a CQC operations manager, because obviously that spoke to some of the feedback they'd had about, not the communication element, and it was just shared as a kind of broad church of this is what we're doing. but there was no indication as to when. I mean, we can obviously chase that up for you and, you know, try and get some more robust answers to some of these questions that are still inconsistent. And similarly, at the same forum, you know, the question of PIRs came up, and again, the operations manager was saying yes, they are red. You know, so we've still got quite a lot of areas of inconsistency that I think we would, on your behalf, really like to get some clarity on, and likewise for Philippa and her team, because we're all existing in this kind of wait and see bubble at the moment, which, you know, ultimately it's you as providers that impacts.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. But we'll put all of this together in a resource pack, and if there's anything else that you want us to try and seek some clarity on your behalf, then as always, mine and Denise's contact will be in the resource pack. So do drop us a line. So on behalf of everybody, thank you very much. That was a really useful time and exchange of information. Such a lot, as you say, but you know, we're still in this bubble, so you know, we'll just watch this space, and as soon as we have any updates. The one thing that struck me with regards, as you know, we do some smaller bite-sized sessions. Is it worth kind of running something on challenging CQC reports, if we can do something short and succinct information?
So the session that I'm doing at the Care England conference is only 45 minutes, and
Okay.
that session will then be repeated on the webinar on the 1st of April. So it will be exactly the same on the webinar.
Great.
So once you've got all of the Care England details, I know a lot of the care associations kind of piggyback on the back of those webinars and share them with their members.
Great.
And I'd be, you know, delighted to see Sussex at those webinars. The more the merrier. We've normally got, you know, a couple of hundred people on them from all around the country. So
yeah, fantastic. Good. We will do that. Thank you very much.